We have one more question to answer pertaining to chapter 5. And that is, we begin on chapter 5 by saying that the Medrash tells us, "B'tchila Allah b'machshava, livrei ha'olam b'midas hadin," that originally, at first, God considered creating the world with the attribute of judgment. However, he saw that the world could not endure. Therefore, he added into the world the attribute of rachamim, of mercy. The Alter Rebbe goes on to say, what does that mean? What is the attribute of mercy that God added into the world? It means that God brought into the world the attribute of mercy, which is divine revelation through tzaddikim and the signs and the miracles recorded in the Torah. And then he goes on to speak about the level of the nevuah, of the prophecy of Moshe Rabbeinu. And then he goes on to speak about the level of the souls in paradise. And that is where he concludes chapter number 5. What is the connection between these ideas? The Rebbe elaborates on this in a sikha that he spoke, Parshas Mishpatim, in the year 1967. And there the Rebbe goes on to explain that the question here that the Alter Rebbe has is, if the world was created through the 22 letters of the Torah, and these are the kelim, the vessels of the world, and therefore these vessels are a limitation, a tzimtzum to the light, how is it possible for there to be miracles in the world? A miracle is a breach of nature. And therefore, by creating a miracle, God would override these 22 letters of creation. And furthermore, as we expressed over the last 2 weeks, that the tzaddikim, who are like Moshe Rabbeinu in the world of Atzilus, who are one with God, what is the reason that they need to perform mitzvahs? If they are one with God all the time, God is before them all the time, what is the purpose of them observing the commandments of the Torah? The purpose of doing a mitzvah is to bring godliness, which is beyond creation, into this finite world. But they are already living beyond this finite world. And so the Alter Rebbe here begins by saying, you should know, when God created the world, all of machshava, it entered into his thought. He considered, before creating the world, to create the world with midas hadin, with the attribute of judgment. In other words, if he would create the world with judgment, there would be no second chances. It's not like you play baseball, you have 3 strikes till you're out. And there's no such thing as an accident, a mistake, a shogeg, inadvertently, I was under duress. There'll be no consideration. If God created the world through stern judgment, any time a person would violate a little commandment, it would be immediate death. God saw that the world could not endure such harsh judgment. And therefore, before creating the world, already he brought into the world the power of miracles through tzaddikim. Now, this answers another question. And that is, we know that if you look into the Torah, into the Bible, when did the real miracles begin? The real miracles began really when God took the Jews out of Egypt with the 10 plagues, the 10 miracles, and then again the splitting of the Red Sea. And that was really the year 2448 on the Jewish calendar. Now, in other words, for 2448 years, there were no miracles. How did the world endure all these years? Furthermore, how does these miracles break the nature? How does it enter into the realm of nature once the world was created through the 22 letters of the Aleph base? And therefore, the Alter Rebbe says, that what does it mean that God brought into the world the attribute of mercy? So says the Alter Rebbe that these are the tzaddikim and the miracles recorded in the Torah, Sheb B'Torah, implying that already when he first created the world, and even before creation, we know that the blueprint of creation is the Torah. So in the blueprint of creation, already God made a contingency with the creation, that there'll be a time that there are tzaddikim, and they are going to create miracles, and these miracles are going to override nature. This is hinted actually in the Medrash, where it says that after the splitting of the Red Sea, so then the waters returned to its proper strength, le'esano, to its proper strength. It says the Medrash, don't read le'esanoi, to its proper strength, but rather le'tanoi, to its agreement, to its contingency. Because God made a contingency before creation that you should know. The time will come, the Jewish people are going to come to the Red Sea, and you are going to split the sea before them. And this is an agreement in creation. If you don't split the sea for the Jewish people, you should know that the entire sea is going to disappear. Because the only reason why I created you and allowed you to flow all these years is because we have an agreement, we have a contract. When the Jewish people will come to the Red Sea, you are going to open up. You're going to allow them to go through. When the Egyptians are going to enter, you're going to cover them over. And this is true for all the miracles and all the tzaddikim throughout all the generations. Already before creation, God implanted this DNA within the nature of creation, that anytime a tzaddik comes and he wants to break nature, he has the power to do so. And this is what the Alter Rebbe is coming to tell us here, that even though God created the world and recreates the world every moment anew, and he recreates the world every moment with the 22 letters of the Aleph base, and these 22 letters of the Aleph base are the vessels of creation, and this is the concept of tzimtzum. Yet at the same time, he also added into the world the attribute of mercy, which is the miracles through tzaddikim, and that allows tzaddikim to override these 22 letters of creation. Comes the question to mind, if that is the case, what about Moshe Rabbeinu? Moshe Rabbeinu, who stood at Sinai, and God came down to the mountain, and Moses elevated the world to God, and they became one. There was no longer now a separation between heaven and earth. In other words, before the Torah was given, we say, Hashemayim Shemayim LaHashem. The heaven is unto God. Va'aretz nasal of the other. And the world is for man. There was a separation between spirituality and materialism, a separation between holiness and the physical. So then you can argue that Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob needed to do a mitzvah to bring God down into the physical world. As we know that when Avraham Avinu sent Eliezer to go and find a wife for his son Yitzchak, Avraham told Eliezer, I want you to swear to me. Now, in the time of the Holy Temple, where there were courts, anytime a person took an oath, he put his hand on a Sefer Torah, on a Torah scroll, or on a pair of tefillin. At that time, by Avraham Avinu, there was no tefillin and there was no Torah scroll. Even though Avraham Avinu studied the whole Torah before it was given, and even though he fulfilled the mitzvah of tefillin spiritually, Avraham Avinu did not put on tefillin. Why? Because the physical remained physical. There was no way to transform the leather of the cow and make it holy. The only thing that Avraham Avinu had in the physical world that was truly holy was his bris. And therefore, even though it's the opposite of modesty to ask your servant to put your hand on your bris, yet Avraham Avinu had no other choice because he needed Eliezer to make this oath. He says, I need you to put your hand over here and swear to me by this mitzvah that you will fulfill my request and find a wife for my son Yitzchak. At that time, there was a separation between heaven and earth. But Moshe Rabbeinu brought about the connection between heaven and earth. And Moshe Rabbeinu, who speaks to God face to face, why is Moshe Rabbeinu now obligated to fulfill the mitzvahs of the Torah, to observe these commandments? And therefore, the Alter Rebbe goes on to say that you should know the prophecy of Moshe Rabbeinu, even though it was very high. However, it was enclosed within the world of Bria. And we're in Bria on the levels of Netzach Hod Yesod, the lower levels. Why not on the higher levels? Because the levels of Chesed and Gevura in the world of Bria is actually creation. And therefore, you can argue that if you was on that level, you saw creation. See, that is in the case. Again, he has this connection with God. The actual prophecy, which means this comprehension of godliness, is on a lower level of Netzach Hod Yesod, which is the level of victory and acknowledgement and bonding. For there is a gap, there is a separation between Moses and God, and therefore to connect with God on this world, Moshe Rabbeinu also needs to practice and follow the laws of Torah and mitzvahs, which gives us additional insight to understand what the meaning of a miracle is. Because on one hand, if there's a miracle, at that time, there's a revelation of God that's beyond nature. So one can argue, if I witnessed the miracle of the splitting of the Red Sea, I saw God beyond nature. So the answer is, the Egyptians that saw the splitting of the Red Sea, which means they saw the effect of God in nature and the effect of God that broke nature. So they saw the outcome, but they didn't see the actual revelation of God. And therefore, even though we witness every day or from time to time, like Hanukkah and other holidays, the revelation of God beyond nature, it doesn't mean that we actually have a comprehension of this. We see the effect of this. We see the outcome of it. But as Alter Rebbe goes on to say, where do you comprehend this level of revelation? That is in paradise. That is in Gan Eden. That is where the souls are. Only the soul in paradise, when it's stripped from the physical body, can it comprehend these revelations of godliness. But Moshe Rabbeinu, who is in this physical world, did not have that ability to comprehend the level of godliness. Furthermore, in truth, every Jew at Sinai witnessed and comprehended this level of godliness, the level that we comprehend in paradise. And that is why it says, after God said the first commandment, was the souls left their body because they saw this revelation of God. They no longer wanted to remain in the body, and the body could not contain the soul. The soul was so excited from this revelation, it simply left the body and connected with this revelation. And this is true when God said the first commandment and the second commandment. After that expiration, the souls leaving the bodies, God created Tchias HaMesim. He resurrected the dead. The souls went back into the bodies. This is true for all the Jewish people that witnessed the revelation of God on Sinai. But after that moment, they returned to nature. They returned to the norm. In contrast to Moshe Rabbeinu, Moshe Rabbeinu remained on that level of comprehension of godliness. And that's why God tells Moses, V'ata poi amoidi modi, you now stay together with me. Don't go back to the level of the average human. You will remain now on this level of spirituality. Yet at the same time, it wasn't exactly like the souls comprehend godliness in paradise. And therefore the Alter Rebbe says in this chapter, you should know that it's true that he had prophecy, which means a comprehension of godliness, but yet it was on the level of Netzach Hod Yesod, and therefore it lacked the true comprehension. And therefore even Moshe Rabbeinu needs to perform these mitzvahs. This is basically the insight that the Alter Rebbe in Tanya is trying to relate to us and the depth that he's bringing forth to us. We now continue chapter 6 on page 107 in the Steinsaltz Tanya. You could also follow in the lessons in Tanya. We now continue with chapter number 6. The lessons in Tanya, it's on page 892. Here the Alter Rebbe now introduces a famous concept which we find all over Chassidus, and that is the definition of Shem Elikim, the definition of God's name of Elikim. V'hinei Shem Elikim hu Shem midas hagvura v'atzimtzum. Page 107. The divine name Elikim corresponds to the attribute of gevura and constriction. Therefore, who gamkein bigimatria hatev. Therefore, it's also numerically equivalent to the word hatev. What does that mean? That what is hatev? What is the nature? Nature is not Mother Nature taking over from God, an independent reality, but God is the source of nature. So when we say, oh, it's nature, nature is taking its course. Yeah, it's God in nature, but not that nature has an outside power. The power of nature is God. God vivifies nature every moment anew. If for one moment he would stop creating, it would return to nothingness. It's interesting to note that it's explained in other Hasidic discourses that the word teva, nature, means tuvu b'yamsuf, to be sunk in the river. What does that mean? What is nature? Nature is God recreating the world every moment anew. But being that it's so natural, being that it happens automatically every day, we forget to realize that God is actually creating the nature every moment. It's like an old-fashioned film. You have little frames, and the frames move so fast that you see a movie. But really, every frame is a recreation of the universe. But now that the frames are moving so fast, all you see is one seamless movie. The same is true. Every moment God is creating the universe. We don't say, wow, every moment God is doing a miracle, because we take it for granted. It's tuvu b'yamsuf. It is immersed in the river. It's sunk in the river because we don't comprehend the magnitude. We don't comprehend the reality of ex nihilo every moment anew. That is the definition of teva. That is the definition of nature according to Chassidus. Nature means teva. Tuvu b'yamsuf, sunk in the river. Why? Because it happens every moment anew. And because it's continuous, we forget to pay attention to the reality of God creating the world every moment. Another interesting point, Elokim is actually plural. Anytime you have a yud and mem at the end of the word, grammatically, it represents plurality. Why is Elokim plural? If the whole purpose of Shayichus V'Amunah is to talk about God's unity, why is the name of Elikim, God, in the plural? And the answer is that the light is a single light. But this single light, which is a white light, when you put in front of it different colors, a green screen or a blue screen, and an orange filter and a red filter, it changes colors according to the filters. But the light remains the same. The same is true with creation. When we look at the world, we don't see godliness. We see creation. We see the effect. So we see millions of different creations. All of these creations are Elikim. It's from God in the plural. But really, it's from Hateva. It's the nature, which means it comes from Elikim. It comes from God, which is one with Havaya, which is one with the Tetragrammaton and God's ineffable name. It's just that God created Elikim. in order that we should seem to be independent. But really, everything is from the one and only Almighty God. He goes on to say here in Tanya, on page 108, that is why the name of Elikim has the gematria of Teva, of nature. The fish of Master because this name of Elikim conceals the supernal light that brings the world into existence and sustains it, so that it appears as though the world exists and functions according to the natural order. And this name Elikim, who mogain the nartek l'shem havaya, is a shield and sheath for the divine name of Havaya. B'shem Havaya, and the purpose of Shem Elikim is to be a shield for the name of Havaya, to hide the light and force that are drawn down from the name of Havaya and bring creation from nothingness into existence, so that the light and life force will not be revealed to created beings and cause them to become subsumed in the divine reality. As we said up until now, that the purpose of creating Shem Elikim is that we should seem that we are independent, which allows us to have free choice. Number one. Number two is, if we actually saw this name of Havaya, in reality, we could not coexist because we would totally expire, like the Jews did at Mount Sinai. Seeing this powerful revelation of God, a person says to himself, who needs this world? Who needs to be part of humanity? Who needs to be part of this finite, limited location, when we have the possibility to actually transcend and become one with God himself? Page 110, who gam kein bechinas chesed, sha'elam yibane boy, zoi he bechinas gevura haklul bechesed. Indeed, this quality of gevura and constriction is also an aspect of the attribute of chesed, from which the world was built. And this constitutes gevura encompassed in chesed. So now we know what it means when we say chesed shebegvura, and gvura shebechesed. Throughout the 7 weeks between Passover and Shavuos, we count the counting of the Omer, and each day we talk about a different svira, a different attribute. And even though there are basically 7 attributes, we say each one of these 7 attributes are also subdivided into 7. So chesed is the attribute of kindness. Gevura is the attribute of severity and judgment. Yet, being that these midos are unified and they love each other and they complement each other, and that's the difference between the world of tikkun and the world of tohu, the world of chaos and the world of fixing. The world of tohu, which is the world of Esav, is a world of arrogance, and therefore there's no room for the other attribute, in contrast to the world of tikkun, the world of Yaakov, where you have Avos Yisrael, where you love your fellow as yourself. Over here, we say there could be the bechina of gevura, the quality of gevura, haklula bechesed, that is also encompassed in chesed. And in other words, this is the idea of how God created the world, on one hand from chesed. On the other hand, he also administered the quality of gevura, and both of them complement one the other. We move on to say here on the bottom of page 110, from the integration of these divine attributes with each other is apparent that God and his sphirot, that is, his attributes, are one. Since they are totally unified with him, they can therefore merge with one another and are comprised of one another. As we find in the statement of Elijah the prophet. As Elijah the prophet said, what does he say? He says, you are the one who binds them and unifies them, and other than you, there would be no unity on high. Now we go back to the beginning of chapter 1 of Shayich V'Amunah, where we ask the question, what does it mean that we say in davening every day based on Deuteronomy? You shall place on your heart that God is God. Obviously, God is God. You should know that the Lord, Havaya, is the same as Elikim. Now we understand it on a totally different level. Pirush. This means that even though Elikim is Teva's nature and Havaya is beyond nature, through the introduction of these 5 chapters, we know now that within nature, you also have Havaya. And that really, Havaya and Elikim, which is also Chesed and Gevura, which is kindness and severity, are actually one. Pirush, and therefore means that these 2 divine names, Havaya and Elikim, are actually one. In other words, Shagam Shem Elikim, since the name Elikim, which constricts and hides the light, is also an aspect of Chesed, of kindness, just as the name of Havaya of Chesed. And that is because the attributes of the Holy One, blessed be He, are unified with Him in total unity, and He and His name are one, for His attributes are His names. So this is where we're going to stop today, in the middle of chapter 6. God willing, we're going to conclude the chapter next week. And being that tonight is Hanukkah, to connect this, what we just read, with Hanukkah. We had the class this past Thursday, and we described over there that there are 3 miracles of Hanukkah. And as we said here, that these miracles were part of creation, that God already administered this quality of rachamim, of mercy, into creation. And these 3 miracles of Hanukkah already were part of creation. What are the 3 miracles of Hanukkah? Number 1, the victory of the war, a small army against a large army. Number 2, the finding of the cruse of oil. And number 3, the fact that the oil lasted for 8 days. And we explained that the victory of the war, which is today, the 24th of Kislev, this is Teva. This is God in nature. That in nature, we had to fight the war. 2 soldiers had a clash, and one could have won the other, and yet, miraculously, one overpowered the other. So you see nature, you see a physical war, yet within the physical war, God creates a miracle that you become victorious. But the main idea and the main focus on the 24th of Kislev is Teva, is nature, is Elikim. But Elikim is one with Havaya. It's not a contradiction. So even within nature, God is able to work His magic. Then comes the next day, the 25th of Kislev. We find the cruse of oil. This is already called a higher level of unity, which is called Yuchrelah. This is already now the revelation of God beyond nature, but yet it has an association with nature. It's Havaya Echad, Hashem Echad, God is one. It's connected with the world. Yes, you see miracle, but yet it's a wonder. It's associated with nature. And then you have the 3rd miracle, which is Havaya itself, beginning the 26th of Kislev. 26 equaling Shem Havaya, God's name, the Tetragrammaton. And here we see the miracle of how the oil lasted for 8 days. There was no connection or attachment with nature. There was no finding. The oil on its own did its job. It lasted for 8 days. To end with a story of a miracle of a tzaddik, being that we are talking about Hanukkah, and in the bracha of Hanukkah we say that God creates miracles by Yom Mahim ubizman hazeh, in those days and our days. If you believe that Hanukkah only happened then, you do not fulfill the mitzvah of Hanukkah. You have to see the miracles in your daily life. And this is connected with Shaykh V'Amunah, that Havaya Hu Elikim, that every day, even though we see nature before our very eyes, but we have to believe that at any moment God can break nature, and God can go beyond nature and perform a miracle if he so chooses, and if we need, and if the time is right. Story is told that a Yid was living that time in Israel. He was doing business in some foreign country, and he happened to be in the building where the Rebbe was living right after the Rebbe assumed leadership. At first, the Rebbe was living in an apartment house on the corner of President and New York Avenue. Later, the Rebbe bought a house on President Street.
Is that what it means?
But at that time, the Rebbe would walk into the building and go into the elevator and go to his apartment. And in the hallway, he sees a man. And the Rebbe was a very big gentleman. He saw someone. He said, "Hello, how are you?" The man responded. He didn't know that the Rebbe was the Rebbe. And the Rebbe turned to him, "What do you do?" He said, "Oh, I do business." "Where do you do business?" "I do it in Nicaragua." So the Rebbe said to him, "Tell me, is there a mikveh in Nicaragua?" He said, "I don't know." He says, "What do you mean you don't know? If you're doing business there, so that's the reason why you're there, to bring Yiddishkeit and the light of God to that part of the world."
Marlene Dash.
And so he said, "Okay, thank you for the gesture. Thank you for the idea." And the Rebbe went upstairs and he went on his way. We're talking about the 1950s. 60, 70, 80, over 30 years later, this man is traveling through New York again. At that time, the Rebbe's fame was worldwide. The Rebbe was giving out dollars on Sunday. And so he decided he wanted to go get $1 from the Rebbe. He goes by the Rebbe for $1. The Rebbe looks at him, gives him $1 and says, "No, is there a mikveh in Nicaragua?" This man hadn't seen the Rebbe for over 30 years. And now he was older. He also grew a beard. And yet the Rebbe recognized him just by looking at him. You have to realize there was thousands of people that went by every Sunday. And yet that the Rebbe should pick him out and choose him and say, "No." So is there a mikveh in Nicaragua? Blew his mind. This fellow was actually a Gera Chassid. And he goes back to the Gera Rebbe and he tells the Gera Rebbe, "I have a problem with the Lubavitcher Rebbe." What's the problem? The problem is, it says in the Torah that Joseph was in Egypt. His brothers came down. He recognized his brothers, but his brothers did not recognize him. How is it that the brothers did not recognize him? Says Rashi, because when Joseph left, he was only 17 years old. He had no beard. Now he grew a big beard, and so the beard covered his face. He looked different. If that's the case, to Lubavitcher Rebbe 30 years ago when he saw me, I had no beard. And now I do have a beard. How does he recognize me? So the Getter Rebbe said, I'm not so impressed. By ins, by us Rebbes, kick him in after neshama. We look at the soul, not the body. And so the soul was the same soul from 30 years ago till today. Aber. But what impressed me, he says, is durchgegangen so Jahre. So many years have elapsed. So many years have gone by. And what does the Lubavitcher Rebbe in Brooklyn concern himself with? A mikveh in Nicaragua. In other words, there are many Rebbes, they have Chassidim, and their main priority are their students, their followers. And therefore, they need to focus on their location. And here, the Rebbe is in Brooklyn. He has tens of thousands and hundreds of Chassidim and followers, and he's worried about a mikveh in Nicaragua. That's what impressed him. Comes along the holiday of Hanukkah, we have to remember, it's true, we have to make latkes for ourselves and for our family and donuts, etc., etc. But don't forget about another Jew in Nicaragua. Don't forget about your neighbor next door, knock on their door before Hanukkah tonight and say, hello, do you have a menorah? Do you have candles? Do you want to join me for a lighting? Come inside to my house. I'll let you figure it out on your own. But each one of us has this mission. Each one of us has this obligation. Each one of us has this responsibility to inspire another Jew and bring more light to the world, and also non-Jews, to follow the 7 Noahide laws and to prepare ourselves and the entire world, the Kabel Pnei Mashiach Tzidkeinu.